Ready. Right.
Okay, so this is the Hall of the Fire Giant King. It's a module from the D20 system and TSR, and what it's done is that this has been integrated into Map Tool, which is a piece of software that allows you to control many factors on the board that normally you couldn't. I'm really going to talk about the features of Map Tool as opposed to, let's say, the functions of it. Essentially what we see here, we're zooming in on 3 characters. And one thing you'll notice here is that one of the big things this will do for you is you can set up lights and opaque objects such as walls and columns and such, and really get a much more interesting, sort of unexpected but realistic effect that maybe no one would have imagined would have occurred, but is very accurate in terms of line of sight, hiding in shadows, and so on. So here we have 3 characters. We zoom in. One of them is an elf, and she's carrying a torch. Another is an elderly man who has no light source. And the third one is an image that we took from Facebook of our friend Rob. Oh, close that. And essentially, he's got a 5-foot radius light. One thing I should mention is that this is the Hall of the Fire Giants. So every square here is 10 by 10, but we have turned it into 2 5 by 5 squares, or 4 5 by 5 squares. So essentially, normal size figures, 4 of them can fit in one square here. So let me show you. Pull this person out of the wall. I'll go to view, show as player, turn that off. I'll pull this person out of the wall as the DM. So I'm going to go into a simulated player mode. Now normally when you do show as player, as the GM, what this does is it hides all the creatures who the characters can't see. And also, I should note here that since we're sort of in super mode, because we have the GM's position, so normally all these areas that you see as gray would be black. But since we're the GM, we get to see more, and it still illustrates the effect very well. So here you can see this elf has got this lantern, and you can see the effect of it lighting up this radius across to here, and then half light, again double out from there. So it shows how far the party can see. And since she has the light, and by the way, this is infrared pen we have our setup here on this table so we can move it, as she moves, so does the light. And so even though this gentleman here could normally see quite a good distance away, because he doesn't have a light of his own, he can only see a little bit. Now you notice too, as he goes on the corridor, there's a light source here, and he can't see the light source around the corner, but he can see some of its light shining on the ground here from his perspective, because this corner cuts it off. So it's very effective in the sense that he could actually see something if he was sitting right here, for example. And you could discuss that in the gameplay that, you know, he does see a little bit of light down the corridor. But why does he only see part of it? Well, because of where he's standing. It's pretty precise. And also, I'll note here, if you go to the edge, he starts to disappear as he gets to the edge, because now he's literally hiding in a shadow. If you look right here, you can see he's starting to disappear. He has no light, and it's quite dark there. And this is the edge of the only light source available from the elf. So he's actually starting to disappear here. If you kept going, he would be invisible. If we were in pure GM mode, we'd be able to see him, but the other players wouldn't. Now he could see from his perspective, but the other players, for example, can't see him. Excuse me, open the detail window. So that's just one effect of it. Let's walk through another part of it. So we'll bring the older gentleman in to this other room. So as he comes through, you notice he disappears here, because essentially now he's in shadow. But we can see what he can see from the character's perspective. He sees these lights glowing. He can see a little bit of light down here at the end of the hallway. I'll make this a little bit, reduce the size a little bit. And you can see a little bit of shards of light in the back of the room. That's it. That's all you can make out. Now remember too, all the gray area here normally would be black. But because we're in GM mode, we get to see everything, because it's a little more entertaining. So we'll take a look here too, make it a little bit larger again. Let's say we want to see this gentleman again. So without going into GM mode, we'll grab the elf and we'll bring her light over so she can see. And so here's our older gentleman again. So we're going to bring him further into the room. So he comes in, and you notice it's counting off the number of spaces that he can go. Actually, it'll allow you to go any number of spaces. You just have to be honest about how far that particular person can move. I'm sure a function could be written to limit that. So now you can see a little bit further into the room, but not much. If he comes up here, for example, now he can start to see some of the light sources across the way, but there's so much collateral blockage from the various columns and so on here and shadows that he doesn't see a whole lot. Now, a big difference would be, for example, well, let's go ahead and move him. Now, he'll move into the darkness here. He's going to hide in the darkness. We're going to set him over here. He's going to hide over here in the darkness. And you see he disappeared. But one advantage of it, where he's at now, is although he's in the shadows, he can see a lot. He can see all the lit areas as far as they go and where they're exposed between the columns. If there was a creature hiding on the other side of a column, for example, he would not be able to see them because they're also in shadow. But he's nicely hidden. So now we'll go back down here, and we've unselected him, and we'll just go ahead and find other player characters. There they are. So let's bring up the elf. Elf's got this great light source, moves 20, see this far into the room. You can see that there's a little bit of shadow here. Can't see a whole lot past these columns, but can see between them a little bit. Comes over here, let's say, play a conservative next to the light. Oh, now they can see an arm of somebody. So by moving carefully and cautiously, you can see, we'll zoom in a little bit here, that they've actually spotted somebody. And this person's probably already spotted them because they're standing right next to a light and they've been waiting in that room. But you notice the elderly man never saw that person. He just hid in the shadows himself. If we come up to here we can see the elderly man in our half light, but you see these big shadows cast by the columns. And now if we go right here, we get, there it is. So now we see that there's an intruder in the room, or at least in this case probably a fire giant. One way you can tell he's a giant, by the way, is by the size. So if we click on this gentleman, try it again, we can see actually, and it's pretty easy to do, I'll show you how it's done. Let's see here. Here we go, sorry. Size. He's actually size large. We could make him huge or gargantuan. As you can see now, he's huge. If he's huge, he occupies a giant, 4x4 here is actually 20 by 20. Or I should say, let's see if you can look here. I'm sorry, 4 squares by 4 squares. But actually, he's just a giant. He's not that big. So we'll go ahead and fix his size again. And here I'll take him back to where he originally was, to large, which means he occupies an entire 4x4 square. So he can move forward here, and he can see as well. We can take this down again. So you can kind of get an idea of how an encounter might work, where normally you try to communicate with your players what they can see, what they can't see. In this particular case, you could set up the terrain, and then they can begin to move through it. And they spot an arm, first off, that might actually be good enough to spot them before there's some sort of surprise attack. If they wandered straight over and moved 20 without doing a half move to try and see where they're going, for example, then you might say, well, they stumbled right into the giant, although this is a borrowed tag, by the way, because the Secret Police on here, we use it as a giant. We could change that tag to make it more accurate. But this is, again, just a quick mock-up. So as we go over here, you can see the throne room. And one of the things we can do, too, is just see more effects of the light here. So let's go ahead and select this elf. And if we move it 5 feet at a time, you can begin to see the effect. And if we were to say that this was a half move situation, where the character's moving very carefully to see what they can spot at any particular moment, this might be a legitimate maneuver by a player, so they could see what they could spot in all these areas. If they simply just move their move, instead of actually moving slowly, let's say move their full move in one big sweep, then you might argue, well, they really can't see all the in-between positions, and they can only see the final positions. And here you can see they finally spotted these lights up here, and this large obelisk-like object is coming to view for the first time. It's also important to note that we have fog of war on, so essentially, if there's something that they have never encountered before, it will be dark gray. Once they've actually encountered it once and walked past the light, it then goes to a light gray, so they at least can see it, but they won't know the positions of the creatures in it. So essentially look a lot like this room right here, where as the elf begins to walk away from the giant and barriers start to crop up, the giant will start to be hidden again because the elf can no longer see them. And just to further give an example of this, we can see how the elf walks down this hallway. So this has all been registered, and essentially we can either do it with the pen, or we could do it in 5-foot intervals, if we wanted to, just to spot everything. Again, this would be like a half move situation where we're moving very carefully. Now, an interesting side effect you notice is that, for example, they see a little pool of light down this hallway. Now, if this were all black and they never gone this hallway before, that would be a little clue, about what's going on down there, and at least that it goes that far. And if there was a character or a monster standing there, then they would be able to see that, or if they walk through the hallway. So one tactic might be for them to hide in the shadows here, turn off their light, and watch that pool of light from distance to see who walks through it. Of course, that could also be a great tactic for the people who live here. So, as we take a look here, we'll go back down, we can see what the elf can see. And we'll go down step by step, and you can see the light shifting here. Now the elf is walking past this wall of lights. The two lights together, for example, mix so the elf can see. Now for the first time, the elf now at the corner here can peer into this room. So if a player says, I want to peer around the corner, but we don't want to show myself, well, now you've got a realistic way to do that. Okay, you can peer without actually going around the corner, but this is all you can see. Do you want to actually move down and look around the corner? They can move another 5 foot. They could also argue they reach their head around, and here's what they can see. And again, they can't see the back of the room at this point. They can only see up to the half light. Again, this is the giants, so each of these squares is 10 feet, so it's actually quite large. And the rubble here also has been set up to cast some shadows. So you notice here, we can keep going in, they can cautiously walk into the room, and you can see, for example, the natural shadowing created, which will cause them to be unable to see certain areas. For example, it's a great place for intruders to hide in these dark areas. At this point, this would again be all black, because the character's never been here before. It would not be gray. So they have no clue where this wall is and that there's an alcove here, for example, until they walk into it. Now again, we could use the light pen to do this. Since we play with multiple players on the board, we keep moving the pen over. Finally get to the edge here, and looks like a volcanic field. We'll just walk them to the edge here. And they might begin to see something. If they can fly, for example, they might fly over here, and boom, they might see this individual, for example, hiding in the shadows. I'll move it over. Right here. Hidden from everyone else's view. But again, and I'll close this up. Again, this is a good example of what you can do when you've got the whole setup put together. And again, we're not talking about functions here, or how to set it up. We're really talking about features. I'll also note that this IR pen, working with the Wii controller from Johnny Lee's setup, is part of the setup here, so that we can grab tokens on the board and move them.